Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Just so you guys know, it is being recorded apparently. So if you ask a question or anything, I'm probably going to repeat it back just so it can be heard on the recording. Feel free to ask questions though. If I have not met you before, hello, my name is Sarah Ferlazzo. I am a real estate attorney with Williams Parker. Williams Parker has been around for 100 years. Our office is located in downtown Sarasota, but we also have another office in Waterside. So if you haven't seen us, definitely check us out. We don't just do real estate. We have several different practice areas, but what I do is I handle residential and commercial real estate closings, development work for subdivisions, condominiums, that kind of stuff. I represent individuals, developers, businesses, and I get to work alongside realtors just like you guys. So my goal is to give you as much information as realtors as possible, as much information as you'll let me give you, so you can be the best agent that you can be for your clients. And when you don't know something, I encourage you to reach out to me, reach out to your business partners, because they can be a resource to help guide you through whatever it is you're going through. Despite the title of the presentation, Weathering the Storm, we're not just going to talk about hurricanes today. We're going to talk about several unexpected things that can happen before closing, and how you can help your clients through that unexpected, unforeseen circumstance. I'm probably going to talk for about an hour and a half, maybe. I don't really know how long it's going to take me to get through it. I tend to talk too much, so if we get close to that, I'll probably try and rush through the end of it, because I want to give you guys the opportunity at least 30 minutes or so to ask questions. And then also there's going to be some wine and cheese afterwards, so you can talk amongst yourselves, talk to me, and we can, network and all that fun stuff. So the main provisions we're going to talk about today are going to be risk of loss and force majeure, but I incorporated in my presentation several other provisions of the contract as well. So we're going to talk about, first I'm going to bring up some stats regarding hurricanes and all of that. Then we're going to talk about contract provisions. Then we're going to get into some real life scenarios, best practices, that kind of thing. And then if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about the FEMA 50% rule. High level, very high level. All right, so first we're going to get into some stats. Oh. And I have this in front of me here because I can't see that, and I can't see that. I can't see very well at all. So I need it as zoomed in as possible right in front of my face. Let's see. Full screen. Let's bring this up. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, no, I can't see that. Okay, so hurricanes are obviously not hypothetical where we live, right? Milton's October 2024 landfall in Siesta Key was Sarasota County's first direct hit since 1944. Was anybody here from Milton? Okay, pretty much everybody. All right. I was 8 months pregnant, so that was really fun. That was a great time. It hit us just 13 days after Helene and brought 6 to 9 feet of storm surge ashore. So it was terrible. We got 3 back-to-back terrible storms, and everybody's still recovering from that. There was $333 million in residential damage in unincorporated Sarasota County alone, with over 4,000 properties affected by the storm. Back-to-back storms like that can show you just how fast your closing can get taken off track. We're going to look at hurricane season itself now. So Gulf Coast hurricane season runs June 1st through November 30th. Because the Gulf sits in the Atlantic Basin, it shares the same dates. There are 2 risk windows, early June to July, and August to October peak, which that seems like the entire season to me. June, July, August, September, October. Okay, so we're good in November. Good in November. Knock on wood. The 2026 outlook is below normal for the basin, but below normal still puts named storms and hurricanes in play. So 1 landfall is all it takes to affect your closing. So, I think they're estimating 8 to 14 named storms with 3 to 6 hurricanes Gulf-wide, okay? Disaster preparedness sales tax. This is really important to mention to your clients. Florida no longer runs limited window holidays. So House Bill 7031 made storm prep supplies permanently tax-free effective last August. So it's really important. It replaces the old 2 14-day seasonal holiday tax savings. And then there's also some items the hurricane supply items are always exempt. So your generators, batteries, tarps, fire extinguishers, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, gas cans, tie-down kits, and life jackets. Those are permanently tax-free. So what does this all mean for buyers and sellers? A storm can impact both the condition of the property and the ability to close on time. So the FAR bar contract, which that's the contract we're going to be looking at, the risk of loss and force majeure provisions address both of those issues, helping the parties determine who's responsible for the damage and whether contract deadlines can be extended. So we're going to look at those two provisions real quick at a glance, and then we'll get really into it. So this is really a mental model for you during this class, right? Which provision we're under. And then you can also keep this in mind if we have a storm approaching. So 2 questions. What happens if the property is damaged? That will point to risk of loss. Who bears the physical damage to the property before closing? That's risk of loss. A lot of people get these two confused. So I want to make sure we can differentiate between the two. And then what happens if we can't close? That points to force majeure, delays in performance when an event outside of anyone's control gets in the way. And have you guys been provided a copy of the PowerPoint? No? Okay. If you leave your card or something, I can email it to you afterwards too. I'm happy to share my materials with you. Okay, so these are 2 different questions that come together. A single storm can damage the home and also make closing impossible. So knowing which provision to look at when is key here. The bulk of the class will be our first section that we're going to turn to next. It looks at the specific provisions in the contract that you guys are going to look at when something unexpected happens. So in this first section, we're going to walk through the actual FAR bar language. We're going to look at maintenance. We're going to look at escrow procedures. We're going to look at risk of loss and force majeure. So we're going to look at those 4 sections of the contract. I'm going to read the provisions exactly how they are in the contract, and then I'll explain them in plain English. The reason I'm going to read them is because who has actually read the contract from start to finish? Wow, that's amazing. That's a lot more than I expected. Not a lot of people actually read the language in the contract, especially because these are not points in the contract where you would fill in a blank, right? A lot of times people are only reading where you fill in the blank. These are hidden in the contract. I'm going to show you exactly where they are, and that way you know where to point to, and you know exactly what it says. So I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to explain it, and then we're going to kind of use it as an exercise too. All right. So first up, we have the maintenance obligation. What condition the seller actually has to deliver the property. Okay, so this is section 11, and it's in both contracts, the standard contract and the as-is contract. You'll find this in section 11. So property maintenance, except for ordinary wear and tear and casualty loss, seller shall maintain the property, including but not limited to lawn, shrubbery, and pool in the condition existing as of the effective date. And then it says, see paragraph 9A for escrow procedures if applicable. We're going to get to escrow procedures on the next slide. But what this requires, no matter what, the property must be maintained as it was when you went under contract. So this is a separate condition from casualty events. This is separate. This provision means that from the time the contract is signed until closing, the seller must keep the property in substantially the same condition as it was on the effective date. In other words, the seller can't let the property deteriorate while the transaction is pending. The seller is responsible for maintaining things like the AC, the refrigerator, the lawn, the landscaping, the pool, the general condition of the property. If the AC was working when you went under contract, it has to be working when you close. If the AC was not working when you went under contract, good luck, because it's very hot. Okay, so there's 2 exceptions to that. Ordinary wear and tear is fine, normal aging, everyday use of the property. Casualty loss, the damage caused by an unexpected event, such as a hurricane, fire, flood, fallen tree. That casualty loss situations, those are handled under the separate risk of loss provision, which we'll turn to in a couple slides. Okay, so you have your example. The contract is signed April 1st, closing's May 15th. The seller has to keep that lawn mowed, maintain the pool, keep the property in good condition. Again, if refrigerator was working when you went under contract, refrigerator has to be working when you close. What you don't want to do is have a seller let the pool turn green, stop maintaining the landscaping, and let a known roof leak worsen, something like that. A hurricane damaged roof is not a maintenance issue. This is totally separate again. It shifts, that would be under a risk of loss analysis, which is section 18M. I'm going to throw in some examples that I've dealt with, not recently, but just over the course of the past few years, so that way you can really apply it. I always think of this issue. I had somebody buying, I want to say it was a mobile home, but it was a really nice mobile home, like totally redone, nice appliances, right? Inside the home, it had one of these fridges. I don't know what they're called. I just do the hand motion. French doors. Okay, perfect. I don't get in homes very often. Buyer was super excited. He goes to the walkthrough and all of a sudden it was one of these doors, just the one door. Apparently those are very different things in value, especially when you're buying a $150,000 mobile home. And the only reason the buyer bought that home was for the refrigerator. So he says, so he's freaking out, doesn't want to buy the home. It was replaced with a fridge that was not the same or similar value, right? We call the seller and we say, where's the fridge? Because this was clearly not the same fridge. Seller says, oh, well, the ice maker stopped working, so I got a new fridge. And I was like, but it's not the same. I'm on Home Depot website trying to figure out what the value is. Maybe we can get the guy a credit or something like that. All of a sudden, the seller finds the fridge. And the ice maker works perfectly fine. Yep. So she had another mobile home right next door and swapped out the fridges because it was nicer. Anyway, the moral of the story is that it has to be the same condition. If the ice maker was not working, yes, she has to replace it, but it has to be of the same or similar condition. Or better quality too. So keep an eye out for those fridges. Okay, so your takeaway is the seller must deliver the property in essentially the same condition as it was when the contract was signed, except for normal wear and tear, casualty loss, or unexpected casualty events. What if the seller hasn't finished that upkeep or required repair by the closing date? So the contract doesn't force the parties to delay or walk away. It uses an escrow mechanism, which is where we're going to go next. So we'll probably use an example for this one, but I'm going to read the provision first. This is found in section 9A, both contracts. We're going to look at as-is first, just because it's shorter. If prior to closing, seller is unable to meet the as-is maintenance requirement, as required by paragraph 11, a sum equal to 125% of estimated costs to meet the as-is maintenance requirement shall be escrowed at closing. If actual costs to meet the as-is maintenance requirement exceeds escrow, seller shall pay such actual costs. Any unused portion of escrowed amounts shall be returned to the seller. What does that mean? If the seller can't meet the maintenance requirement by closing, the contract lets the deal close anyway, and 125% of the estimated cost to cure is held back in escrow. Any unused portion goes back to the seller. If the real costs are over what's escrowed, the seller owes the difference. So you have the example, pool turns green, landscaping died before closing. The estimated cost to restore it is $4,000. So you're going to escrow $5,000 because that's 125%. But if the actual costs are only $3,800, the seller gets their $1,200 back. If the actual cost is $5,500, seller has to fork up that additional $500. That's how the escrow procedure works. And this is an automatic procedure. It's not the seller says, no, I don't want to close until I get it fixed. This is automatic. The buyer can force the seller to do this. Okay, so the next situation is going to be the same escrow idea, just under the standard contract. And remember, under the standard contract, you have repair and permit limits that come into play. Okay, so I'm going to read it again. If prior to closing, the seller is unable to meet the maintenance requirement as required by paragraph 11, same paragraph, or the repairs, replacements, treatments, or permitting as required by paragraph 12, then sums equal to 125% of the estimated cost to complete the items, but not in excess of the applicable general repair, WDO repair, or permit limits, shall be escrowed at closing. If actual costs to exceed the applicable escrow amounts, if actual costs exceed the applicable escrowed amounts, seller shall pay such actual costs, but not in excess of the applicable limits. Any unused portion goes back to the seller. Okay, so same 125% escrow concept, but a little broader, because under the standard contract, the holdback also covers the required repairs, WDO treatment, and permitting from paragraph 12, subject to the limits that are set out in the contract. So what does that look like? You have a seller that agreed to repair a roof leak, but that roof leak can't be fixed before closing. So let's say your estimated repair costs are $8,000. Escrow held would be $10,000 because that's 125%. If your repair costs are $7,500, the seller gets back $2,500. If the repair costs are $9,000, your seller gets $1,000 back. If the repair costs are $11,000, the seller pays the excess up to the repair limits. So using that last example, repair costs, repair costs are $11,000, seller pays the excess. Let's say the repair limit was $10,500. So you did the $10,000 escrow, they're only required to fork up that additional $500, okay? Because it's up to the repair limit. But keep in mind, that's only for their repairs. If they failed to maintain the property, that would be a separate issue, okay? Yeah. So the question is, if the repairs aren't done, is there a standard time period? No, but so what would happen, how it would play out is this automatic escrow procedure would kick in, but you would have a separate escrow agreement, right? Prepared by a real estate attorney. So you have to get a real estate attorney involved to prepare that escrow holdback agreement that says when they have to complete the repairs by, what's needed in order to release the funds, all of that. Typically, if I'm preparing an escrow holdback agreement, I would ask the contractor how quickly they can get it done. And if it's not done by a certain time, XYZ happens or something like that. Maybe the entire escrow is just sent to the buyer and the buyer and the seller is, I have to be careful because I'm being recorded. I was going to say SOL. Sorry. I didn't know a better word for that. That's something that you could put into the escrow agreement. Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh.
Cut the tree down on a Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
leaning towards the neighbor's house.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're using the standard, we had other expenses, and I don't see fences in here. Fence damage too.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do this?
So yeah, the question is like fences and trees and all of that. Again, the property has to be maintained in the condition as of the effective date. So if you didn't have fallen trees and you didn't have fence damage when you went under contract, those have to be fixed. But we're going to talk about risk of loss here in a second because it does cap that damage amount. Okay? Yes, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Likelihood though, I'm looking at the last one, like repairs cost $11,000
Mm-hmm.
and then seller pays, I'm sorry. I mean, when it's $10,000 and then it's another $1,000 and you don't have that money, place is closed, right? You've already closed at this point?
But you have that separate escrow agreement in place.
The only recourse though is for them to sue.
If they don't fork it up, correct. You could sue for breach of contract because you have an escrow agreement in place.
There's no money in hand. So.
Correct, because you've already used all of the money. So the 125% is the automatic amount. Feel free to modify that. As a buyer's agent, maybe you want, are they only obligated to escrow 125%? Yes. But, you can always ask for more, and put it in an addendum, put it in the escrow agreement. I'm going to come back to this a lot during this class, that put it in writing, you know, put everything in writing in an addendum signed by all parties, escrow agreements, inspection, repair agreements, all of that. Yeah,
Okay, so I'm getting a little fuddled.
sure.
So the agreed escrow for general repairs, which is what the roof would fall under,
Mhm.
correct? Is $8,000.
Yes.
Example. So storm, tree, whatever, the whole roof has to be replaced.
Mhm.
The 125% kicks in, which takes it from 8,000 to 10,000.
Mhm.
Then we get to the bottom one here. It says repairs cost $11,000. Well, I think a new roof these days is a minimum 14,000
Mhm.
for a little shingle roof. So if we said it's 14,000, you've got 10,000 under the escrow, so there's a $4,000 balance. I'm trying to understand if the seller is technically on the hook for up to $18,000 because the 8,000 was the original agreed repair limit. That
So you're getting into risk of loss now because a casualty event happened, right?
all right, yes, okay, let's ignore that then. Ignore the storm, ignore the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Roof leak is not maintained. It worsens during the course because he hasn't been able to fix it. Ceilings fall in, everything, irrespective. The cost to make the repair is now 14,000. You have 10,000 because of the 125%, but there's an extra 4,000. Who is paying that?
Are you saying because, did we close in your example? You know what,
Oh,
we have not closed yet, or we have closed? Because that's important.
well, your example says the seller agreed to repair roof leak, but finish it before closing, the estimated cost is. Your bottom example is repairs cost 11,000. I'm really not following, you know, why the seller is paying the excess.
The escrow procedure requires them to pay the excess.
Say then also up to the repair limit. If the original repair limit was $8,000, but yet he's agreed in writing as an addendum, I presume, to go ahead and fix it, even though it's going to be more than the $8,000. And now he's being told it's going to be 11,000. But what does that mean up to the repair limit?
Because you've
already done that for the repair.
So in the standard contract, there's the repair limit section in section 9A. So let's say what number are we using in your example? 8,000 or? Okay, so estimated repair, but in this example, estimated repair costs are 8,000, but I just threw in the example that the repair limit was 10,500.
Okay, so what you're saying, okay, let me see if I'm getting,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I don't.
No. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to closing.
Yes.
Right? That's where the 125% kicks in.
Because he can't fix it. Mm-hmm.
And before closing, so that's where the 10,000 comes from. But say between the time when he got the quote and when they're actually doing the repair, it's now 14,000,
Mm-hmm.
right? You say the seller pays the excess up to the repair limit. Is that repair limit the original 8,000?
No, the repair limit in the example that I just threw out was 10,500. So the seller is only obligated to pay up to the repair limit, but will still have to pay the excess from correct, not beyond the repair limit. Okay, so in the example it says, sorry, the print is really small. Repair costs are, let's say.
All right, so
Okay.
you're saying if the total is 10,500,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual cost is 11,000. The seller is only paying actually 10,500, and the buyer has to make up the
Correct.
Okay, that gets a little confusing the way you have it written.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I think it was because I threw in, that's not on the slide, let's say the repair limit is 10,500. Okay.
I said, I think it's that you wrote seller pays the excess up to the repair limits, but we're already over the repair limit.
So the repair limit is based on the purchase price.
Usually, whatever, yeah, whatever number you have in there. Okay, so estimated repair costs, let me see if I can dial this back in. Estimated repair costs are $8,000. So we're going to escrow 10,000 because that's 125% of the estimated repair costs. But so in the contract, the limit is 10,500. But the actual costs end up being $11,000, but we only have $10,000 in escrow. So we need that extra money up to the repair limit from the seller. So it's only an extra 500. And the buyer would have to assume the rest. Correct. Unless something else has been agreed upon. Yeah. Sorry if that was confusing. Yeah. No, gosh. Mm-hmm.
They have all this agreement. Yep. When the roofer tears off whatever, it gets into the roof, now it's trusses, things that couldn't be visible during an inspection. Now it's $25,000 there.
So that would depend on what your escrow agreement says. You know, if you're on the as-is contract, it says that they pay the excess, but you got to make sure that escrow agreement says they're on the hook for the full excess. Does that make sense? Because the seller is not just forking up money to be held in escrow without some other agreement in place. You have to have the other agreement in place. It's not just the contract. So your other agreement is going to determine what the seller is on the hook to pay in excess of what you've already held back.
And you guys want us, right?
No. No, please never write something like that. No, you have to hire an attorney to write this. Correct. If you have to do an escrow holdback, you immediately need an attorney to do it. If you're closing with a title companies, I don't think they write them because they're not supposed to. If you're closing with if you're closing with an attorney's office, they can probably write it for you. There might be a fee to write up the agreement, but they can write it for you. If you are closing with a title company, you would have to hire a separate attorney outside of the closing to write your agreement for you, which will probably be more expensive than if you just close with an attorney's office in the beginning, because they can write all those agreements. They know what's going on. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, sorry.
Seller's not gonna know that. I know, but I just want to make sure because they can go ahead and attack the seller.
Did they know about it? Right, exactly. Their obligation is to disclose what you know about that. Yep, that's not readily observable.
Say it is the 10.5 in the contract, the repairs are 1,100, 500, it's not going to be an issue, but say it's more than that. If the seller won't pay it and the buyer won't pay it, can they just then cancel the contract?
No, you already closed in this situation. An escrow agreement only comes into play when you're closing. You're going to close, and then you have this separate agreement in place. Does that make sense?
Okay, if
Yep.
it isn't closed and you're in the process of creating this and neither one wants to pay the excess, can it be then canceled?
Well, it depends on what the issue is. So in this issue, there's the roof was leaking and the seller agreed to fix it. So the seller's in default if they don't fix it or enter into some kind of agreement to get it fixed, right? So then the buyer, if they cannot come to terms on this roof leak, on repairing the roof leak, then the buyer can cancel and get their money back.
Okay,
Yep.
that's my.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's okay. First of all, I ran here from another meeting.
Oh, no.
I may have missed this.
Okay.
Or, I do believe you talked about as is.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep.
So, an as is contract typically, as is, but if somebody comes back and seller really wants to comply about something, it may not be the roof, but something, and they made an agreement, and it's not done at close,
So say the estimated, amount for it was $1,000. And it's not done, then it's 125% of the $1,000.
Right.
Right, that they would have. Okay.
Correct. It was just, no, totally fine. It was just the slide before that we went over the as-is escrow procedure, which is very similar to the standard. The standard just, I highlighted the difference, is that that additional information, so not only if maintenance, if things can't be maintained as of the pursuant to section 11, the maintenance requirement, but also repairs according to the seller's obligation to under section 9A to make the repairs for WDO permit or anything like that. That's under the standard. And then this one is the as is. Yep. So just some minor differences there.
Okay.
The standard just throws in the extra, not only maintenance requirement can't be that can't be met, but also maybe the repairs or something like that. So either one. Yeah.
Close a house, they remove the washer and dryer,
Mhm.
the back wall is black mold behind the washer and dryer. Nobody found anything during the inspection, now it's $30,000.
So where are you at closing? Are you at your walkthrough or have you already closed? So the seller, did the seller know that there was black mold back there? Yeah, so they have to disclose what's not readily observable that they know about. So if they know that the floorboards are damaged because of water damage and they put a carpet over it, that's not readily observable and they know about it, they have to disclose. Or they could be on the hook for failure to disclose, right? In your issue, they might not have known that there was black mold back there. That would be something that should be caught on during your inspection. Hopefully. I don't know how far they pull out those items. I don't really know what happens during your inspection. Mm-hmm.
Because there's over 1 million species of mold.
Yeah.
That's pretty, impossible.
Right. So the problem is you have to prove that they knew about it. How are you going to, what are you going to show? What information, what evidence do you have that they knew about it? If they had mold testing done and you know that there was a report out there, you could potentially sue them and ask them to fork up the mold report and to prove that they knew about it. Since we're on the topic of mold, there was a little handout that I gave to you guys. Couple things in here. We'll talk about the first, 5-6 pages or so. But since we're talking about mold, I included the mold rider in here because some of you guys might not have seen this before. There is a mold inspection rider. I think it's I. So if you're on an as-is contract, you can have any inspection done that you want. Mold, bees, bats, rodents, whatever you want. If you're on a standard contract, there's only 3 inspections you're allowed to have: a general, a WDO, and a permit inspection. Mold is not included. So if in your inspection you found mold, that's not one of the 3 things that the seller is obligated to fix. Okay? So honestly, if you're using a standard contract and the buyer is worried about mold, you should attach this separate mold inspection rider that can allow you to have the mold inspection and put something in there that says, if there's mold found and the cost to repair it is X amount of money, I'm allowed to cancel the contract. Okay? Standard contract does not allow for a mold inspection. As is, you can do whatever you want. Yeah.
I could just write.
Mhm.
And it's $1 million home that's never been lived in for 3 years that they've owned.
Mhm.
I could not tell, normally you can smell it or there's signs somewhere, mold. They paid for 2 mold inspections because of health concerns. And this house has mold throughout the house.
Wow.
You can't see it anywhere.
Mhm.
It's not black mold visible, it's in all the ductwork of the house.
Oh gosh.
So I would tell all of you guys, just to do the same thing over and over again. Never skip a mold inspection, because this was shocking to me. This house, roof seemed to be okay.
Right.
But it's not.
Yeah.
So,
It's Florida. Gotta have mold inspection. But just keep, I know a lot of people don't use the standard contract. It's just not, I don't like it. I get it. I don't like it. So, if you're on that standard contract, mold is important to your client. I would assume mold is important to any client, but maybe ask the question, hey, would you want to include this in the offer just in case? Since we're on a standard contract, you can't automatically get that. We can't force the seller to remedy mold situations unless we're on this contract. Okay. And I don't, or unless we're using this writer. It's not that they require them to fix it. It's that you can cancel if it's over a certain threshold, okay? But then that puts it in, kind of like an as-is situation where you can negotiate that they make those repairs or give you a credit or something like that. I'm glad we talked about mold. Okay, so we talked about the escrow provisions. They address the situations where the seller hasn't completed maintenance, repairs, other obligations. By closing, the contract allows the parties to move forward with closing by holding back those funds from the seller proceeds to ensure that work gets done. What happens when the issue isn't unfinished maintenance or repairs? The property is actually damaged by hurricane, fire, flood, other casualty event after the contract is signed. That's when we're going to talk about risk of loss. So we'll get to that. There we go. Okay. This is the long one, but I'm going to read it. If after the effective date, but before closing, the property is damaged by fire or other casualty, and the cost of restoration, which shall include cost of pruning or removing damaged trees, does not exceed 1.5% of the purchase price, the cost of restoration shall be an obligation of seller, and closing shall proceed pursuant to the terms of the contract. 1.5% is our magic number. If restoration is not completed as of closing, a sum equal to 125% of the estimated cost to complete the restoration, not to exceed 1.5% of the purchase price, will be escrowed at closing. Does that sound familiar? If actual cost of restoration exceeds the escrowed amount, seller shall pay actual costs, but not in excess of the 1.5% of the purchase price. Any unused portion of escrowed amount shall be returned to the seller. If cost of restoration exceeds 1.5% of the purchase price, the buyer can elect to either take the property as is with the 1.5% or receive a refund of the deposit, and then everybody's released from all further obligations under the contract. Last line's important. Seller's sole obligation with respect to tree damage by casualty or other natural occurrence shall be cost of pruning or removal. Essentially, they don't have to replant a tree. Okay. So who bears the risk? This whole paragraph essentially says that the seller bears the risk of loss until closing. Damage after the effective date but before closing is the seller's responsibility. The buyer does not assume the risk of loss until after the contract closes. There is a special rule for trees. Restoration cost includes the cost of pruning or removing damaged trees. The seller is not required to replace trees lost to a casualty. Seller's sole obligation for the damage is pruning or removal. That's important because how can you replace a 100-year-old oak tree that fell down? Okay, so now that we know that the seller carries the risk until closing, everything turns on that one number, whether the cost of restoration exceeds 1.5% of the purchase price. So let's run that math on a couple examples here. And hopefully these are easy to understand. Okay, so the purchase price times 1.5% is the restoration threshold. And then we're going to compare it to the estimates. So you have in example A $500,000 home, 1.5% threshold. And I'm so happy that I put this in a thing so I don't have to have my calculator out. $7,500. The actual storm damage was $5,000. Okay, so that's below the threshold. The seller pays to restore the property and the closing moves forward. That's under the threshold. Of course, if it can't happen before closing, that's when you would have that 1.5% or 125% of the purchase price held back. And then you would go through that escrow procedure. In example B, that is I made the text way too small. $800,000 home. The cost the 1.5% threshold is $12,000, but your actual storm damage is $50,000, that's going to be above the threshold, right? So what happens, the buyer chooses to either take the property with the 1.5% credit or cancel and get their deposit back.
So there's no, it's not up to the seller, like if the seller wanted to go ahead and pay that, it's not their choice.
It's not their choice. Once it's above the threshold, it's in the buyer's hands. The buyer gets to choose. Seller's still on the hook for that 1.5% though. Example C, I had to throw this one in here. $600,000 home, your 1.5% threshold is $9,000. The actual storm damage, believe it or not, is exactly $9,000. Can you believe it? Who would have thunk it? So if it's exactly 1.5%, it stays the seller's obligation because in the contract, in that language, you'll see it has to exceed 1.5%. So if it's exact, right on the money, then it's going to be the seller's obligation. Yeah? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. If seller really wants to sell the home,
Mhm.
can they negotiate for the seller to say, well, I'll pay half of that 50,000?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you
Oh, yeah.
can do it.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, so that's really just, sorry, I keep forgetting to repeat the questions. Can the seller agree to do over 1.5% so that the buyer doesn't cancel? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's up to, that's, you're kind of in a situation where it's in the buyer's court. Seller wants to keep them on the hook, they better fork up some money. But, you could also have a buyer that says, oh, I'll just take the 1.5% and take the house as is. Probably not, but you never know. They can, you can always work it out, but then that's when you want to get it written into an addendum. Real estate attorney can help you with that language to make sure that, all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed. Yeah.
And that can just come out of seller's proceeds, I suppose?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So in that case, it's, they say, I'll fork up 25.
you have that.
Half of that. Yeah. I was like, what is the math there? 25,000. I'll fork up $25,000 credit if you still close. It's going to be buyer's obligation. The only problem with that is what if it's actually more than $50,000 in damage and you don't know it yet? So that's going to be something a buyer has to decide on. I think we've finished this one. Okay, so let's look at when the buyer has the choice. What choices the buyer has once the estimate is higher. That's what we're going to look at next. Okay. Is that rain?
Yeah.
Speaking of leaking roofs. Oh man, okay. Okay, so the buyer choice is when the damage exceeds 1.5. So when the estimate exceeds the threshold, section 18M, which is that risk of loss paragraph that's buried in the back of the contract that nobody's ever read, gives the buyer 3 paths. Terminate for a full deposit refund. So I'm going to walk away. There's $50,000 in damage. Absolutely not. They can cancel and get their deposit back. They can proceed as is, take the 1.5%, get their $12,000. I think the math was $12,000. $12,000 credit, and then still buy the property and have to deal with it later. I don't know who would do that, but that's an option. Or negotiate a different resolution because it's in their hands whether, it's up to them whether they're going to cancel or not. Any negotiated outcome goes into a written addendum. I encourage you to have a real estate attorney draft that addendum. What happens if the estimates conflict? I threw this in there because I knew somebody was going to ask, but the contract doesn't say. Of course not. In your standard contract, does anyone know how that works out when there's a difference in estimates? You get a third estimate. Might as well do that. Agree to get that third estimate done by a neutral third party, and whatever they says goes. That's a way it can play out practically, but the contract doesn't say that. So section 18M gives us the 1.5% threshold, but it doesn't tell us what happens when the buyer's contractor says it's 8,000, seller's contractor says it's 20,000. Because that estimate can determine who has the right to make the next decision, it's important to get those detailed written estimates from qualified contractors. It's really hard to do that after a storm hits, I understand, but make sure, I think that also another There's a few things that I'm going to talk about over and over and over again. Get an attorney involved, get it in writing, and make sure you have those people that you can call that's going to answer the phone after that Hurricane Milton comes through. Because that's going to be your biggest thing. You want to have your insurance address or insurance person. You want to have your roofer. You want to have your, what else do you need? Your lender. You want, oh, a local lender. Key. Because somebody in California has no idea that a hurricane just hit and they have no idea what's going on. Local lender is huge. And then, of course, your real estate attorney to help you, guide through what those next steps are going to be. Oh, I actually remembered that I was going to say that before I came here, and then I forgot. Your tree people. Yes, huge. Huge. You have to have the tree people, a screen guy. Those are really important. Fence people are really important because even if the fence just fell over, you still have to fix it. Who's going to come out and fix it or at least give you an estimate? That's the biggest thing is you got to have something in writing that says how much it's going to cost. Because then we can't do our 1.5% math if we don't have that. Yeah.
If we use Williams Parker
Mhm.
or an attorney for the closing, and you have to draw up, for example, escrow agreement, you have to draw up these additional addendums. Is there an additional fee generally?
So I don't charge to help with the addendum language because that's just me helping you so you don't commit unauthorized practice of law. But the escrow agreement, we take a big risk when we're holding other people's money that doesn't belong to us. So we do charge to draft an escrow holdback agreement. We charge $250 to draft the agreement, $250 to hold the funds. So it's $500. And I'm pretty sure most attorneys' offices charge, it's pretty much the same, no matter who you close with or no matter who you're using. But yeah.
If you're closing, so say, for example, we're using in-house, whatever.
Yeah.
Title company, and it was required, would that be?
So the problem with that is I'm not it's a little different because I wouldn't be holding the escrow. The escrow company would be holding it. I'm just drafting the agreement. I would probably just do that hourly just because I can draft the agreement pretty quick, but I know people are going to come back to me with questions after, and when can the money be released and all of that. So I would probably do that hourly because I wouldn't be able to gauge how much time I'm going to spend on it. Yeah. Okay, so estimates conflict. I think we got through this. Oh, if the parties are far apart, a neutral third estimate can help bridge that gap. That's how the standard contract deals with it. It's probably how you would deal with that in this situation too. Okay, so now we're going to look at the other provision that we talked about, force majeure. That's when something actually prevents closing. This one is long. I'm probably not going to read the whole thing. Okay. Oh, my bad. This is not hooked up to this. This is only so I can read. Okay, so force majeure is 2 sections of the contract. So 18G and 5B of the contract. So this is when some kind of event actually prevents closing. So this is not, who pays for what. This is what happens next, right? So the buyer or the seller shall not be required to exercise or perform any right or obligation under this contract. I'm going to pause for a second. Notice how it says buyer or seller. So neither party is required to perform or be liable to each other for damages so long as performance or non-performance of the right or obligation or the availability of services, insurance, or required approvals essential for closing is disrupted, delayed, caused, or prevented by a force majeure event. Force majeure has lots of different things it could be, so I'm not going to talk about all those. Big list. I think it was updated right after 2020. It includes like pandemics and stuff like that now too. The force majeure event will be deemed to have begun on the first day the effect of the force majeure prevents performance, non-performance, or the availability of services, insurance, or required approvals essential to closing. All time periods affected by the event, including the closing date, will be extended a reasonable time up to 7 days after the force majeure event no longer prevents performance under this contract. Provided, however, if the event continues to prevent performance under this contract more than 30 days beyond the closing date, then either party can terminate the contract by delivering written notice to the other, and the deposit shall be refunded to the buyer, and everybody's released from their obligations. 5B also, okay, let me summarize really quick what we just read. This is the most misunderstood concept, I assure you. Essentially, the force majeure is the contract's pause button for major events outside the party's control: hurricanes, floods, fires, government shutdowns, pandemics, other extraordinary events. Why this is misunderstood is because a hurricane nearby does not automatically excuse everything. The key question is, what performance was prevented, by whom, and for how long? Those are the questions that you're going to ask. Just because a hurricane's coming, it's not, okay, I don't have to close. Nope, Hurricane Milton's out there in the Gulf. I'm going to stop everything I'm doing because I don't know what's going to happen with the property. That's not how it works, okay?
The insurance, they won't want.
And I'm going to get you insurance, I promise you, because there is a caveat there. We're going to talk about it, and you're going to learn something today. I mean, maybe not, I don't know. I can't believe this is being recorded. Okay, 5B, extension of the closing date. If an event constituting force majeure causes services essential for closing to be unavailable, including the unavailability of utilities or insurance, hazard, wind, flood, homeowners insurance, the closing date shall be extended as provided in Standard G, which is that paragraph right before. So these provisions together tell us when the clock starts, how far the deadlines move, when the closing has gone long enough that either party can cancel or walk away. That timing is really the heart of how that force majeure works day to day. On the next slide, we're going to look at the deadlines step by step. But really, what this talks, the big picture here is that no one is penalized when an extraordinary event genuinely prevents closing. Okay, the contract's deadlines are flexible. They don't necessarily break. People don't just walk away, but they are flexible up to a point. So again, what performance was prevented by whom and for how long? Okay, so this is timeline. Automatic extensions are in section 18G and 5B. So picking up from that provision that we just read, practical effect of force majeure is all about timing. Step 1, when does that clock start? The event is deemed to begin on the first day its effect actually prevents performance. I'm not going to use insurance as an example because we're going to talk about insurance in a second. But let's say banks are closed. I'm going to give examples on the next slide too, but let's say banks are closed. So that day that the banks close and you can't wire your funds, you're prevented from performing, right? As the buyer, you can't wire your funds. You're local. You can't pick up the phone and call I don't really know. I'm just using banks as an example. You can't wire your funds. The event is deemed to begin on that day that you can't. Not the day the storm was named, not the day the storm made landfall, but the first day it genuinely blocks something. That something can be performance itself or the availability of services, insurance, approvals, whatever is essential to actually perform under the contract. Yeah, the closing agent, their office is closed. You can't close if the closing agent is closed. Step 2, the automatic extension. So this is the part agents most need to hear. It's an automatic extension. Okay, the buyer, the seller can't say, this, that, or whatever. You automatically have up to 7 days. Okay, no addendum is required. You can, of course, put it in writing to confirm everybody's on the same page on the closing date, but it is an automatic exception, an automatic extension. Every affected deadline, including the closing date. So let's say our closing wasn't even, it's still for a month, but you have the inspection deadline. You can't get an inspector out there to come inspect the property. That deadline is also extended, okay? It moves together for a reasonable time, up to 7 days after the event no longer prevents performance. So you can now get your inspector out there. You're extended for up to 7 days. So you can go that full 7 days before your inspection period is over. Yeah.
So if you have 10 days for inspection, but you can't get an inspector there until day 12, you don't have to do an extension?
No, it's automatically extended. Every deadline is automatically extended for up to 7 days. Including, yeah. Automatic extension. Yep. And that's why I put in section 5B here, that extension of closing date. A is the CFPB requirement where it's automatically extended for 3 days if if the lender doesn't disclose the CD. But then B is, they just let it right in there and be force majeure, automatic extension. Okay, so no amendments needed for the extension to apply. All affected deadlines, it has to be affected though. Oh, yep, sorry. There we go. All affected deadlines, including the closing date, shift together, but it can't stay open indefinitely. So you have step 3, which is the outer limit. The extension is not indefinite if the event still prevents performance more than 30 days beyond the closing date. Either party may terminate by written notice and the buyer's deposits refunded, releasing both parties. That 30-day backstop is what keeps a deal from being held open, indefinitely forever. I'm going to give you an example of how that could play out in real life. Let's say you have a condo on Siesta. The condo, lo and behold, perfectly fine. Everything, I'm assuming everything's there. It's on the 10th floor, still intact. But as the buyer, you can't use the elevator to do your final walkthrough. And it's inaccessible for over 30 days. You can cancel the contract because you cannot do something, a right to have the walkthrough. You have a right to have a walkthrough. You cannot perform under the contract for 30 days. You can cancel.
So that 7 days.
That's a great question. But I think though, I'm using this as an example from, it happened in 2024. And from what my pregnancy brain remembers is the stairs were like, you couldn't get into the building at all because the first floor sustained damage and the entire building was closed off. I think it was on Siesta. Yeah. So you couldn't access the stairs either.
On a Monday, never schedule Monday. We were supposed to close before the storm.
Oh.
And everything happened.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we had an attorney we were using that was available on the weekend. But if you have an attorney who doesn't answer their phone or, you're panicking during this.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
Never schedule closing on a Monday. Make
Yeah.
sure it's at least Tuesday or Wednesday so you can reach somebody.
Yeah. The problem I had during those storms is I didn't have any cell service. It was like, not only was I 8 months pregnant, I was selling and buying, and I was working. So, I couldn't reach anybody about my homes. I couldn't reach anybody about their homes. There was no cell service for it's the short aftermath where, Wi-Fi is kicking back on and all of that. So that wasn't fun. I didn't have AC for like 3 days. It was very, very warm. Yeah.
So the 7 days is also, but it's be for the.
Yep. All deadlines. Yep.
And
Yep.
weekends don't count.
So it has to.
7 days. Day 1.
So when are you, so it would depend on when you're able to do it again. Let's say your bank's open, you're able to drop off the check on Friday. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so wiring it from Edward Jones, you can start wiring as of Friday. So that's when you're able to resume performance again. So you have up to 7 days from Friday. Then it would go to the next Friday. But you count it from when you're able to resume operations again. So let's say banks open again on Saturday. You can't really wire on Saturday. So I guess it would just depend on exactly what day, because you can wire on Saturday, but the closing agent can't receive it on Saturday. So let's just say you can resume operations on Saturday. It falls on the following Saturday. It would go to the next Monday because when the deadline falls on a weekend or a national holiday, it rolls over to the next business day. Does that make sense?
While we're touching on
Yeah.
that very quickly, it used to be that it would roll over to the Monday or the next business day only till 5 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Language seems to have disappeared.
11:59.
11:59.
Correct. And that's as of the change in 2018. So that's been around for a while now. Yep. No more 5 p.m. deadlines because you guys don't stop working at 5 p.m. Right? We're negotiating repair addendums way past 5. So practice pointer, document the first day the performance was actually prevented and then the day it stops being prevented, because those 2 dates are what's going to drive every calculation from there. Okay, so now let's look at how this plays out. I think we talked about everything here.
Sarah, going back.
Yeah.
Excuse me, to that Friday example, you were supposed to close on Friday, but you can't wire the funds because the banks are closed, but you can do it on Monday. Then the extension stops on Monday. You do
No,
not have it on
you have up to 7 days. So if you can start performing on Monday. Let's say you can start performing on Monday. You have until the following Monday. It's up to 7, you have up to 7 days.
Right, what I mean though is once you can perform, once you can do the thing that's holding you back, then that's when, I mean, you don't then get to go the whole 7 days if what you're, like, again, using the bank idea. Say you're supposed to close on Friday, but you can't because the bank is closed. And so then on Monday, you can have. the
But you don't
funds
have to.
wired, but you have automatically until
7 days.
Friday. You do not have to do it on Monday, even if the bank is open.
Correct. You have up to 7 days.
Up to 7 days.
Just has to be within that 7-day window. Yep. So they, again, I can't even remember what day of the week it all happened. It was such a blur. So let's say Thursday it was supposed to close, right? Miraculously, the closing agent opens on Friday. You are not required to close on Friday.
Okay.
You just have to close within 7 days of Friday, because that's when you can start performing again.
Whoever the affected party.
Correct. You have up to 7 days. Yep. And you don't have, again, it's an automatic extension, so you don't have to do the addendum, but you might as well, like, hey, me and the seller are going to agree, we're going to close this on Wednesday. Put in an addendum, so that way, we know everybody's on the same page, but you don't have to. You have up to 7 days. Yep, you're not required to perform right away. Okay, so now we're going to use it in a real world example, how the deadlines play out a little bit. Closing was set for Friday, October 17th. Hurricane makes landfall on October 8th. October 8th is when the clock starts, because that's the first date that we're going to assume that whatever performance is actually prevented, okay? Not simply the day it was forecasted, but it makes landfall, and whatever needed to be done for closing cannot be done. October 20th is when the event stops preventing performance. That's a really long time. Power and services are back, offices reopen, carriers resume writing insurance, all of that. Because the extension runs up to 7 days after that, the closing date can be moved as late as October 27th, assuming that's a business day. Does that make sense? I think that kind of answers everybody's question.
So that's the 7 and 3rd.
That's the 7. And then every other effective deadline also moves with it. So your loan approval, all of that. But then November 16th would be the 30-day outer limit, where if you can't access the property for your walkthrough by, what was that, November 16th, that's when you can cancel. And either party can cancel too. Not just the buyer. Seller can cancel too. Okay? And then buyer gets their deposit back. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Two dates are going to drive everything. The first day the performance is actually prevented, and then the day it stops being prevented. Make sure you track both and calendar those deadlines, because they're going to be important.
Still going to talk more about insurance.
Yes, I think that's my next slide.
Okay.
Yep. Right, but really quickly, I'm going to run through why a party can't perform. I did too many slides. I'm sorry, guys. I'll give these to you. If you guys give me your info, your emails, I'll email it out to everybody. The right column answers the question, what does unable to perform actually look like? Okay, so banking disruptions. The buyer can't access the banking services to wire closing funds. I had somebody that was in Colorado, not even in Florida when the hurricanes hit, that said they were prevented from wiring the funds. They are not prevented from wiring the funds. As long as their bank is open and the closing agent can receive, you can close. Okay, so just because the guy in Colorado is trying to use force majeure, he has to actually be prevented from wiring the funds, but he can go to his Bank of America and wire the funds, and closing agent is still open at that time. So that was not an excuse. Didn't work. Closing agent's office is unavailable. This is a big one, because a lot of times they close, when the day before or something like that, right? They can't conduct the closing if they close, right? Properties inaccessible, evacuation orders or storm debris is preventing inspections and the final walkthrough. I mean, I think that the barrier islands typically close a little in advance. They want to get everybody off, right? If your closing day is that day and you can't get out there to inspect the property, you are prevented from closing. I don't know why you would want to close, but okay, utilities unavailable, necessary services such as power and water are not operational for testing or verification. You got to test the water at closing or at the walkthrough. If the water is still not on, you don't have to close. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. The I mean, it took FPL, what, 3-4 weeks to get power back on? If you can't check the power, then you don't have to close. God, that was a terrible month. Financing delays. I think I'm getting PTSD. The lender cannot fund because a reinspection is required or lending operations are disrupted, assuming the contract is contingent upon financing. If it's not contingent upon financing, not really a problem, right? Lender can't fund because reinspection is required. A lot of times they're going to have somebody, you know, after the closing, they want to drive by the property just to make sure it's still there, no visible damage. Maybe they just want to walk around and make sure everything's good. Lenders will do that a lot. And a lot of times it's a scheduling thing. There's so many people have to go out there, or there's so many people that are trying to get, you know, these handful of people to go out and inspect the properties. It can't happen right away. And then insurance unavailable. I left this for the last one because we're going to talk about it next. Coverage cannot be bound due to carrier restrictions during an active storm event, assuming the transaction is contingent upon financing or obtaining insurance. What does that mean? Oh, I changed that slide, but I forgot to change one. There we go. The FAR/BAR contracts are not automatically contingent upon a buyer obtaining insurance. They are not. The mere fact that insurance is unavailable after a storm does not necessarily excuse performance under the contract, okay? If you're on a cash contract, let me back up. Insurance availability may become a force majeure event only if one of these two things. So it's contingent upon financing. You cannot get your loan if you don't have insurance. But and then the other option is you have that rider in place. So the parties have incorporated the homeowner's insurance contingency rider or flood insurance rider, which makes the insurance a contractual condition to close. So it's either financed or it's cash with an insurance rider. If it is cash with no insurance rider, insurance is not a condition to close. If you can't bind an insurance policy on a cash contract without that rider, you still have to close. That is assuming that that's the only thing that's preventing you from closing. There could be other things that are preventing you, but you can't use that I can't bind insurance claim. I say claim, but you can't use that argument if it's cash and there's no contingency to bind in or to obtain insurance. Does that make sense? Did everybody know that?
No.
Oh, yay! I can be done now. I'm just kidding. I told you I was going to teach you guys something, even if it's the only thing you learned today. Okay, so the inability to obtain insurance does not automatically extend deadlines or excuse performance. The key question is whether that inability to bind insurance is actually preventing performing under the contract. In order to actually prevent performing under the contract has to be contingent upon obtaining insurance. So what are we going to do during hurricane season when we have a cash contract? Use the insurance rider. Yay! That's it. That's the class. So I included just the language from the insurance rider. I feel like it's the most underutilized rider out there. Really important because you can also use it if you want to cap insurance. I only want to pay $4,000 a year for homeowners insurance. Use that rider. If you get a quote for $5,000, you can get out of the contract. Okay, so if you have a cash contract, again, just cash contract, no insurance rider attached. Oh, but I can't, you know, I called State Farm, they're not binding policies, I don't have to close, but the closing agent is open, they have your money, you know, all is good, you can do your walkthrough, you still have to close. Just because you can't bind your insurance policy does not, it's not a condition to close. It's not, the contract is not contingent upon financing. Or I'm sorry, contingent upon insurance. But, again, finance transactions, most of the time, you cannot get your loan if you don't have a bound insurance policy. So that would be your out. You can't perform. The lender is not going to give over. They're not going to approve the contract or approve the closing to close. They're probably not going to wire their money until they have that insurance policy bound. That was it. Okay. Brief little overview here. Keep these separate. Risk of loss asks who's responsible for pre-closing casualty damage and what happens if the repair cost crosses that threshold. What's the threshold? 1.5%. There you go. And then force majeure, can a party perform on time? Are services, approvals, insurance, utilities, lender funding, or closing operations unavailable? That's what that force majeure asks. Together, they're most often oftentimes you're going to have both, right? The storm can damage the property and also make closing impossible. So you would analyze both in that situation. So what all this means, start with the risk of loss. Until closing, the seller carries that risk under Section 18M. Run the math, the 1.5%. Make sure you understand, if it's above or below. Treat force majeure as a clock, not an exit. It just extends deadlines. Unless it's over that 30 days, then you can cancel. Don't automatically sell insurance as an escape hatch. Has to be the closing has to be contingent upon that insurance. Document everything early. So your role is really spot the issue, document it, protect those client deadlines, bring in the lender, the closing agent, the real estate attorney before anyone signs or walks away, and then just make sure you flag issues, coordinate with who you need to coordinate with. Don't give legal advice. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, these are just practical roadmaps, and I talked a lot in that first section. That was really the meat and potatoes, but I do really want to get into some examples because I think those are fun. So I'm just going to go through these next couple slides pretty quickly, but they're really just for you guys to use. This is kind of like a script kind of thing for when somebody calls and says that something just happened. You're acknowledging that, yeah, what happened is stressful, but we got to slow down. It's not just, can we cancel? We gotta get the facts, and we have to get estimates, send photos or take photos yourself, videos, estimates, written notices, all of that. Oral, agreements, they're not enforceable, right? Whatever happens, whatever's agreed upon, has to be in writing. Escalate the situation. Talk to your closing agent, talk to your lender, talk to your insurer, your real estate attorney if you need one. Definitely get them involved as early as possible after something happens. Calendar, let's put those deadlines on your calendar. Know when you're first prevented from performing under the contract, when you're now able to perform under the contract. Calendar that 7-day, calendar the 30-day, just in case. Just make sure you know when the deadlines are. Your goal is to be helpful without giving that legal advice and waiving any rights that your client has under the contract. So this one is the sequence before answering, can we cancel? You got to know what happened. Was it a storm, fire, leak, tree, vandalism? Was it mold, access damage, something like that? You got to know what happened. When did it happen? Before or after the effective date? Before or after closing? What does it cost? You have to have a credible estimate, something in writing, so that way we're not guessing how much something costs. We can do our analysis from there. Does it meet the threshold, that 1.5%? Is it above, below it? Can closing occur? That's that force majeure issue there. Repairs, escrow, lender, insurance, all of that. Can we perform under the contract? Once we gather that information, then we can turn to who we need, which is going to be your attorney, to understand your contract rights, your termination rights, get notices out, addenda, escrow language, deposit disputes, liability concerns. You're going to involve an attorney for that. Sometimes oh my gosh, my bad. Oh my gosh, I was just talking. You guys got to tell me. Well, there's these other slides that I was reading from. Okay. Sometimes your attorney is the same person as the closing agent, sometimes not. So the closing agent's going to want to know about settlement statement changes, escrow holdback changes, mechanisms, disbursement, closing logistics, title-related documents, that kind of thing. And then get the lender involved with loan funding conditions. Something you should always, if there's a lender, your buyer's getting a loan, something you should always ask the lender is if they're going to require that reassessment, reinspection or something like that, because most of the time they're going to want to go out there. Before you start figuring out when you can do the closing, you got to know if they're going to require that. Insurance binding or claims, have your insurance person on speed dial because they can tell you as soon as you can't bind insurance and as soon as you can start binding it again. And then you're going to want your contractors for, repair scopes, permits, availability, safety issues, and estimates. We got to know how much it's going to cost. Yeah. Yeah.
During the storms, I also had a listing. We were supposed to get on the market before the storms. This property had a lot of big oak trees, a lot of them. And if she'd been proactive and tried to take down the trees when you're under contract, what happens then?
Wait, you're under contract. So you can't change remember the maintenance. I don't know why I couldn't spit that out. You have to maintain the property. If you're under contract, you have to maintain the property in the condition existing as of the effective date. So if she wants to trim back trees because a hurricane is coming, I would get that approved by the buyer first, even though it's probably because you're trying to preserve the property. You have the buyer to think about as well, because the buyer could come and say, oh, well, I really liked that 100-year-old oak that was hanging over the roof and I wanted it to stay.
But you can't just, because she did. Several trees came down and she was really upset about that, but.
Right. You could always put in an addendum to have the buyer approve it first. Buyer acknowledges and agrees that this tree is going to be trimmed back in order to prevent damage to the home. Yeah. I would definitely clear it with the buyer first. I would assume that most buyers would be fine with that because if they want the home, they don't want it to be damaged. Okay, now let's talk about some fact patterns before I run out of time. There we go. Okay, so scenario one, $500,000 deal. Storm clips the screen enclosure and a few shingles a few days out from closing. Repair estimate is $5,000. So 1.5% is $7,500. Good thing I wrote it on there because I wouldn't be able to figure it out. Estimated repair is below the threshold because it's $5,000. Ask whether repairs can be completed before closing. This fact pattern does not say one or the other, so that's something that you would have to figure out. Can those repairs be completed before closing? And then you would consider that escrow if repairs cannot be completed before closing. So in this situation, you have risk of loss being implicated because the casualty damage, this is not a maintenance issue, a storm damaged your screen enclosure and shingles. So that's a casualty loss there. So risk of loss is implicated. And then the estimate's below the threshold. So the seller has to repair. And then you would figure out if an escrow is necessary. So your recommended response or next steps, don't tell the buyer that they can automatically terminate before you do that 1.5% estimate or 1.5% analysis. Because just because there is damage to the home doesn't mean that they can cancel the contract. Okay? Gather those repair estimates, confirm closing logistics, and involve that real estate attorney to prepare the escrow agreement if that's the route that is going to move us forward. Your closing questions are going to be whether the parties can close on time, and if a lender is involved or the contract is contingent upon insurance in some way, are they going to be okay with these repairs taking place post-closing? Okay. That's always a question. If you're doing an escrow holdback agreement, you've got to get the lender involved if there's a loan, okay? They have to approve it. All right, scenario two, hurricane roof damage and water intrusion. So you have same structure, just bigger stakes, $800,000 home, hurricane causes roof damage and interior water intrusion a week before closing. Estimate is $50,000. This sounds familiar, we did it before. 1.5% is $12,000 and $50,000 blows past it. So that single fact changes the conversation. When the estimate exceeds the threshold, the buyer may have a meaningful choice to make. So in this moment, you got to be really careful. You got to talk to them about what this means. It's not just a dollars question now. Water means mold. We talked about that. Mold means health and insurance issues, and the lender may have their own requirements too. Water doesn't immediately mean mold. It can mean mold, down the line. So that's definitely something that the buyer will need to take into account. Really, the biggest thing is to slow everybody down, confirm the estimate, look at the water and mold implications, and involve a real estate attorney too, if the buyer decides they're going to move forward. The buyer could care more about money, could care about more than money, the health and safety, the mold risk, the insurability, the lender requirements, timing, marketability. Maybe they need to move in somewhere really quickly and this problem is not going to be solved quickly. So they're going to decide to cancel, and they have that right to cancel. The seller is probably going to care about insurance proceeds, their deductible, their repair timing, contractor availability, and what that means for their carrying costs. If the buyer decides to cancel, they might want to fork up some additional money to keep the buyer on the hook, because then they're going to have to deal with the whole mess themselves. Continue paying their mortgage or, whatever. A written addendum should address the scope of the work, deadlines, escrow, credit, insurance, proceeds. Access is important, and then release of deposits and closing extensions if needed. All right, a large tree falls through part of the roof shortly before closing. The parties do not yet have a formal estimate. The buyer wants out immediately. So this one is more about emotional pressure, because the large tree falls through part of the roof shortly before the buyer was expected to take possession of the property. No formal estimate. The buyer wants out. Without an estimate, there's no threshold analysis. So you can't run the 1.5% test yet. But the property probably immediately needs mitigation, inspection, insurance and safety issues. Those are going to be pretty important in this situation. So the biggest thing is going to be to secure the property, document the damage, obtain estimates, and then obviously get a real estate attorney involved. So as the agent, you would want to avoid telling the buyer that they can cancel without having those facts. Yeah, you have to have those repair estimates to see if they can cancel. Let's see what's next. Oh, I like this one. Inspection period has expired. 2 days before closing, a supply line fails and water damages flooring and cabinets. Seller says it's past inspection. I don't know who came up with these. It was me. So this is a high conflict scenario, because the seller is going to say, well, inspection period is over. It's on you now. It's 2 days before closing, but the inspection period expiration does not solve this. This is a new casualty. This is a new problem. This is not an inspection issue. It's a change to the property's condition after you went under contract, okay? That's a maintenance and risk of loss issue. In this situation, watch for mold, hidden moisture, expect that the lender and insurer want documentation, gather the facts, involve a real estate attorney, and then restoration, reinspection, and closing is going to be your biggest issue here. This one, you would have to get an estimate and everything before you can decide if the buyer can cancel. But I actually had something similar like this happen before, and I'll ask this question. When do you guys do your walkthroughs? Day before? Day of? Day of? Yeah, not a week before, not days before. Yeah. Okay, so there you go. I love that answer. Because I'll tell you a story. We had somebody that they did the inspection the day before, which sometimes it just works out that way. I get it. Did the walkthrough inspection the day before, went to closing the next morning, closed on the property, came back, and a pipe had burst in the bathroom. Kind of like my example. They already closed. It's their problem now. So, but had they, and I don't know if this, we don't know. We're not going to place blame or anything. Had they come the morning of, they might have seen that the pipe has burst in the middle of the night at some point, and then it would have been on the seller to remedy that situation, remedy that issue, because that's a pretty big issue. Or the pipe might have burst at closing, in which case there was nothing you could do to prevent it. Let's just say that that's what happened. But my biggest thing there is shorten that window of when something can happen as much as you possibly can. Okay? Because things do happen. Pipes burst, you know, I don't know another example, but things happen. Okay. So, oh yeah? Oh no. Oh,
The seller,
yeah.
they just agreed to, that they would take care of it.
Yeah, that's best case scenario that you found it even, the day before. Oh, that window. There you go. So the seller has to maintain the property in the condition as of the effective date. So technically they have to repair it. If they don't, they're in breach of contract. Buyer can sue them, if that's how they want to play it out. But the seller is required to fix that. And if it can't be fixed before closing, that's when that automatic escrow procedure would kick in, 125% of the estimate. That's how that would play out. It doesn't always play out like that though, buyer could say, no, I want you to fix the problem before I close. But if the seller is like, no, this automatic escrow procedure says we can do this, they can technically force their hand there. There was something else I was going to say. Maybe it'll come back to me. You talked about your fleek. It'll come back. We'll move on. Okay, so no visible damage, but no insurance binder. A hurricane passes near the property. The home is not visibly damaged, but insurance carriers pause binding insurance. Buyer's lender will not fund without insurance. So from our fact pattern, we know there's a lender involved, which means that you have to have insurance in order to close. But if this was a cash transaction without the insurance rider, be a different issue spotting scenario. So this is likely just a force majeure analysis because there is no loss to analyze the risk of loss, right? There's no casualty to the property, so the real question is whether performance is actually prevented. Remember that finance deal is affected differently than a cash deal. Focus on why closing can occur. If insurance or lender approval is unavailable because of the event, then that's when you evaluate the force majeure deadlines and whether a written extension is needed. You would calendar when they're actually prevented and then when they can start performing under the contract again. Okay, so this one, seller completed repairs before closing. So this one is really just, I want to think of this, and I have another slide about this too. I want to think of this more as like your repair addendum, what you want to address in your repair addendum. So the property was damaged. Seller says that all repairs are complete. Buyer asks whether to accept the property. These are things that you should think of when you're putting that in writing, what they need to do, okay? So ask for invoices, permits, contractor details, warranties, scope of work. Consider whether the buyer has a reinspection right or should request access for appropriate professionals. What I would say is if you're having inspection done, I don't want to come or if you're having repairs completed by the seller, I don't want to come in 2 weeks down the line and find out that they didn't do my repairs that I asked for. I want to get in there right away and look at the repairs, okay? So incorporate into your repair addendum that the buyer has the right to do that, and they can use their third-party inspector to do it. Ask whether the repair work requires permits, HOA condo approval, roof certification, WDO follow-up, mold clearance. The as-is contract, there is no obligation for the seller to close out permits. Did everyone know that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. No obligation to close. What? Yes. Add it in there. Add it in every single as-is contract that you write, that the seller is obligated at their expense to close open or expired permits, and then put it in your repair addendum again, that if they're required to open permits for the repairs, that they are also required to close them out. That makes sense? Yes, maybe not word for word. Wait, which one? Oh, that the seller shall, at seller's expense, close any open or expired permits prior to closing. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Your as-is contract, you're throwing in that permit language, your cash deals, you're throwing in that insurance rider. You got to add some stuff to this contract because it's not a one size fits all. Yes.
Did you say we need to add anything about the fire being walk through for your things?
Yes. So you could just add that within 3 days, let's say like within 3 days of the buyer receiving notice that the seller has completed the repairs, that the buyer has the right to reinspect and confirm that all the repairs were made. And something I would include in my repair addendum is that the repairs are made in a good workmanlike manner by appropriately licensed professionals, because that's not in the as-is contract. Right? And so that's what I would be inspecting. I would inspect to make sure it was completed in a good workmanlike manner. And then I would also ask for the invoices, make sure they're paid, and then make sure it was done by a licensed professional. An appropriately licensed professional, not electrician doing plumbing work, plumber doing, okay. Oh, yeah, I have another slide on this too, so you guys can take a picture of that. But I think I'm running out of time. We're going to go fast. Okay, scenario 7. So the parties want to close quickly and simply credit the buyer at closing. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So this is just why credits are sometimes, why you would want to use a credit, why you wouldn't want to use a credit, and kind of the best practice there. So credits can be attractive because they're fast, simple, no contractor scheduling before closing, and it can preserve that closing date. But why sometimes it's not a one size fits all when it comes to credits. The lender can reject repair credits. Perhaps the buyer is already receiving their allotted credit amount and they can't get a credit. They can't get any more credit. Or repairs may be more expensive than expected. If it's, some cosmetic issue, just give us a $500 credit for that, fine. If you're talking about repairing the bathroom because the water pipe burst, credit probably is not going to be a good solution. Thank you. Insurance might not bind because of, if you're getting a credit, that means the property is not being fixed. So insurance might not insure it because of this outstanding issue. And then you might not be inspecting for hidden damage in that situation, like with the water pipe bursting. You don't know what other issues that might have caused. Best practice would be confirm with the lender, document the scope, consider escrowing, involve a real estate attorney, ask me, hey, do you think this is something that we should get a credit for, or should we go another route? And avoid using a credit to mask those required repairs. Let's see what's next. Escrow holdback. Repairs cannot be completed prior to closing. Everybody wants to close. Some common escrow drafting problems are there's not a deadline in there. There's no release standard, no contractor estimate, no tie to permits. You want to talk about permits in an escrow holdback agreement, and then unclear treatment of excess funds. So we want all of that included in the escrow holdback agreement. So that's why you need to have a real estate attorney draft that agreement. These are just more problems that I should probably just get to the rest of the PowerPoint. I'll email it to you guys if you leave me your email. And if you have questions about any of these examples, just let me know. These are really just scenarios that kind of tie back to what we've already talked about, just more examples. And then these are just questions to ask. Best practices. These are insurance considerations. A lot of times you'll have a seller, I'll just open a claim for that. I'll open a claim for that. Well, when the property is sold, they no longer have a policy. So if they're going to open a claim, they got to do it before. So it's just, there's just a bunch of questions to ask. Has a claim been open? Who's communicating with the carrier adjuster? What's the deductible? Who's bearing the cost? Are proceeds being paid before or after closing? Who are they going to? Is an assignment of claim or proceeds needed? Is it even allowed? Will the buyer's new policy bind if the damage is unrepaired? That's a pretty important one. Because the buyer's got, if they want their insurance policy, they might not be able to get it if there's an open claim or if there's open repairs that need to be made. So that's definitely a big one too. Will the lender require proof of repair, re-inspections, escrow? Just some considerations with regard to insurance claims. That's why these are the questions you're going to want to ask your adjuster. So make sure you have somebody that you can reach out to. These are liability issues. Just because I'm an attorney, I'm going to throw those in there. Thinking about injuries, contractor damage, unauthorized work. Just make sure that when you're helping your client, you're helping a buyer or a seller with repairs that are needed to the property. Make sure that they know that you're going to the property. They've approved that you're going to the property. If you're hiring somebody to come out to the property, they need to know about it. It's their home. If you're the buyer's agent, I wouldn't have somebody come out to the property and do an estimate without clearing out with the seller or the listing agent. So just things to think about. And then this is my addendum checklist. This is important. This is kind of the one, we talked about this a little bit just a couple slides ago. When you're writing a repair addendum, these are things that you want to include. The specific damage or condition that's being addressed, repair scope, standards, contractor requirements, appropriately licensed professional, permits, completion deadline, proof of completion, credit or escrow amount, access, who pays for follow-up inspections, are you allowed to have a follow-up inspection, insurance proceeds, deductibles, assignments if necessary, closing date extension, and then express reservation or waiver of rights if needed. So a lot of people include in their repair addendum that this is the close of the, the inspection period, something like that. I don't like to include that because I represent buyers most of the time. But if you're the seller, you might want to include that's the end of it. Because if you go into your repair addendum and there's still 7 days left, they might come back and be like, oh, we just had a mold inspection too, after you've already agreed to that. I'm sorry, wait, back up. What day is it?
Today's Monday.
Oh, we're using today as the example. And they're, okay.
So, they-
Uh-huh.
7 days.
Okay.
Is there
No, but okay, if I was a listing agent, I would want to say that this, this closes out the inspection period, the buyer. Oh, no, you can just include it at the bottom of your repair addendum. Like, you have all the repairs that are agreed upon. They have not agreed to any repairs. We're moving forward, then yeah, you can just do a regular addendum that says that, no, seller's not making any repairs. This closes out the inspection period. Yep. There was something I was going to talk about that too. Things are going to come to me and I'm going to email you guys later or something. Okay, let me go next one. This is just where common mistakes can be made. The buyer can just cancel, the seller has to fix everything. Those are common mistakes. You have to actually do the analysis there. The credit solves it. That's not always the case. Missing deadlines, even when parties are cooperative, deadlines matter. Don't just assume, oh, well, we've worked it out. We know we're all going to close on this day. Put it in writing or else it's not enforceable. Speaking of not enforceable, text chains, emails, and oral side agreements are unenforceable. Just because you and the listing agent agreed to something in an email or a text change, the parties have to agree to it in writing for any modification of the contract to be enforceable. Also, when it comes to notice, this is just a side note, written notice in the contract, a text message does not suffice as written notice. An email does. Don't text, email. Use clear written addenda and involve a real estate attorney to draft that addendum. Gosh, I got a lot of checklists in here. Best practices before hurricane season. I want to touch on the FEMA 50% rule, so I'm going to skip past this. If you guys have any questions, just let me know. These are just some answers to frequently asked questions. Can the buyer walk away? Who gets the insurance money? The answer to most of these questions is it depends. And then go back through my PowerPoint and you can probably find the answer. Okay. I do want to just touch on this since we're talking about, property damage and whatnot. I'm not going to claim to be a FEMA 50% expert because I am by far not a 50% expert. I am not going to turn this into building code advice. I just want to tell you another thing that you have to look out for if there's damage to the home. So essentially, FEMA's 50% rule mandates that if a home in a designated high-risk flood zone undergoes repairs from a storm, fire, something like that, or just renovations that exceed 50% of its market value, the entire structure must be brought up to current floodplain management standards. Okay? So we can think about those one-story homes that are on Siesta. We probably shouldn't be there, right? If they do more than, if they make renovations or they have to repair more than 50% of the value, they have to bring it up to code. The 50% calculation is based strictly on the market value of the building itself, okay? It completely excludes the value of land, landscaping, any detached structures, pools, anything like that. It's just the actual structure. And just so you have it, the rule was established as a minimum standard under the National Flood Insurance Program. Basically, the primary goal is to minimize the future losses that those little tiny homes are going to endure. And I say tiny, but I just mean one story. By ensuring that they are structurally upgraded to withstand disasters in the future. So if it's more than 50%, it's considered a substantial improvement. To determine if the project meets the 50% threshold, the building officials compare the total estimated repair or improvement cost against the property's baseline market value of just the structure. So the baseline value is typically established by using either the building's assessed value from the most recent tax bill or a third-party appraiser. While FEMA looks at each event individually, that's FEMA. FEMA looks at each event individually. A lot of counties in Florida, like Lee and Collier County, they'll have stricter ordinance that look at they look at everything that was done maybe over a year span. So if you've improved the property over a 5-year span by more than 50%, they're going to have you bring it up to code. Local rules, they're going to look at improvements, repairs, rehabs, additions. They're going to look at your permits, all the permits you pulled over that span, if they look at a span as opposed to just one event. So always check the local jurisdictions. I included in your little handout, I think I included Sarasota County in there, so you know what that looks like. You have the rules for that. Again, I'm no expert. I don't fill these out, but I just wanted you to be able to have that because each jurisdiction is going to have something like that. So even if a buyer and seller agree under the contract what they're going to do, you have to take this into account. This is another factor, okay? Whether the property, like, yes, I only have to pay 1.5% of the purchase price or something like that, but actually the FEMA 50% rule says I also have to bring it up to code, okay? So that's another analysis if it applies there. Yeah.
Can I just say, this is something that's gone through my head so many times, like with Spanish Main and again, properties on Siesta that got hit by Helene. And then you see a condo or villa for sale and it's been gutted halfway up, but now it's being sold. And I've never explored it. I've always wondered about if they were hitting 50%.
And they stopped doing their repairs.
And so the buyer,
yeah.
have a buyer interested in something like that, you need to know if that's the case, because otherwise your buyer could be in a whole lot of hurt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because now it's going to be their responsibility to bring it up to code. And that's not cheap. It's not cheap.
For a second home or something of value, another structure, it's detached, that's a detached structure like pools or fences. What about an ADU that's detached or?
So it wouldn't affect the actual structure that we're talking about, like the main house. That the value of the ADU is not taken into effect. We're only talking about the structure that we're improving. Correct. Yep. Yeah. I think I have an example. So many examples. Okay, so pre-damage market value, $400,000. That's the structure. It does not include the land value, the fence, the pool, the ADU, anything like that. The cost to restore the structure that we're talking about is $210,000. So that's 52.5%, if I can calculate correctly. So that's substantial damage there. So they would have to bring it up to code. And then once that, then you would go to your local rules.
Can I throw something else out?
Yes.
So in the IMAP tax, through the MLS, old school, that's what I use. Often it's broken down and it'll say, land value, improved value, which is, that's our thing, and then just market value. So the improved value is the perceived value of the structure. So you'll see, like on Siesta Key, I had a lovely listing years ago. That was on Cedar Park Circle. And it's just the coolest thing. And the house was worth like $235,000, the improved value.
Okay.
While the land was like $600,000.
Right. Of course. Of course. Yeah, that's how Siesta is.
Property appraiser that determines that amount.
Or you can use a third-party inspector too. Yep, right here. An appraiser by a state licensed appraiser specifically for pre-damage or pre-improved property value. Yep, you don't have to use what the tax bill says. Yeah.
Buyers required.
Buyers required to pay sellers' legal fees?
They have to get.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You have to pay your own attorneys. The only time the other party has to pay, one party has to pay for the other party's attorney's fees is, okay, I'm gonna back up really quick to explain how this works. The dispute resolution section of the contract says there's a 10-day workout period. So when a dispute arises, both parties have to wait at least 10 days before doing anything. That's their workout period. And then after the workout period, you have to go to mediation. And each party pays their own attorney's fees, and you split the cost of the mediator. So you have to go workout period, mediation, you still can't solve the dispute. That's when litigation can start. And then the litigation section says that the other party is or the party who prevails, who wins, is entitled to get attorney's fees back from the losing party. That's the only time that you have to pay the other side's legal fees. Otherwise, you have to pay your own. Does that make sense? So litigation, but it takes a bunch of steps to get to litigation. It's not just, oh, there's a dispute, I'm going to sue. You have to do the 10-day workout period, or else you're in breach of the contract. And then you have to go to mediation, and then you can sue. So a lot of steps that you have to take. This is just about why the FEMA issues matter. Contract dispute, damage estimate might not be the whole problem. You have the FEMA 50% rule to think about. Okay. A seller might not understand why just fixing it is not enough. That could happen there. I have this little graphic too, kind of explains the substantial damage. Again, I can provide this PowerPoint to you guys, but it kind of just explains everything. Cost of repairs, $250. Pre-damaged amount is $500,000. At 50% is substantial damage. Whereas remember when we talked about the 1.5% threshold, it has to exceed 1.5%. Substantial damage is 50%. So it would have to be 49.9% for it not to be substantial damage. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Little different. Yeah, The whole thing took out the window too. Could you believe that? Okay, let's see what I have. Oh, my bad. What did I do? Oh, there we go. I didn't make this. I found it. I verified that everything was right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know who made it. But I verified all the information is correct. So that's great. Okay. Just some final takeaways for you. I'm not going to read all of them to you because I've read everything the whole time. But here is my information. Again, the biggest thing is to have the people have your Rolodex of people that you can call when these things happen, your insurance person, your lender, your local lender, your roofer, your arborist, your fence person. You got to have those people that you can call that are going to come out and help you fix your clients' problems. So, what's that?
Close one in January. Bounce well till then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I found like the way you can get things done is if you have that relationship. It's all about building those relationships. That way, oh, my friend is calling me. I'm gonna drop all of my other clients and help them out. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate.
Yeah.
I'm out of her schedule today, so we definitely appreciate it.
Yeah.
She is a plethora of information, so probably talk for another.
I told you guys in the beginning I talk too much.
Well, we do. Thank you, of course, for being here, everybody. We do have wine.